As fans of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, I'm sure we could all agree that the series is no stranger to making its readers feel confused at times. You know, with the whole "it just works" meme and all, but for the most part, whenever JoJo leaves you disoriented, it's for a reason. Whether it's to instill the fear of the unknown by putting the readers in the perspective of its characters being attacked by a stand whose ability is unknown. And something I've noticed the series creator Hirohiko Araki really likes to do, especially when it comes to the series' main villains, is to show an impossible situation that doesn't make any sense at first, but later be explained after a stand's ability is revealed. Like in Stardust Crusaders, when Polnareff had encountered Dio nearing the end of the part, and each step Polnareff took towards Dio, he would suddenly appear back at the bottom of the stairs, and had described this experience with Dio's stand as being completely beyond his understanding, leaving both the characters and us the viewers pretty confused. But later, once the world's ability was revealed as being able to stop time, it explains Polnareff's experience, which turned out to just be Dio stopping time, walking down the stairs, picking Polnareff up, putting him back at the bottom of the stairs, and then running back up the stairs. And this is just one example of Araki's intentional confusion writing technique. But in today's video, I'll be attempting to explain by far the most convoluted, incomprehensible, and confusing sequence of events in all of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Wait, did you guys think this video was going to be about King Crimson? Oh damn, if you thought King Crimson was confusing, just wait until you get to D4C. So yeah, this video isn't about King Crimson, but rather dirty deeds done dirt cheap from the 7th part of JoJo's Steel Ball Run, and more specifically D4C's introduction arc and the sequence of events leading up to the reveal of the stand's ability, which is another one of those impossible situation scenarios we talked about earlier, and in my opinion is the most confusing arc in all of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and I'm sure those that have read Steel Ball Run could agree. So what is it about the D4C arc that makes it so confusing? Well, pretty much everything. This arc has a lot of moving parts and contains a lot of characters, all with their own motives working separately from one another, moving around the streets of Philadelphia as we go back and forth in time and through different characters' perspectives, trying to solve the mystery of who shot Johnny Joestar, all while Funny Valentine and his yet-to-be-revealed D4C are pulling the strings. But before I attempt to explain what was really happening during this arc and how D4C was being used, we'll first go through the arc as it's presented in the manga to serve as a refresher and also to show just how confusing this arc is from a first-time reader's perspective. So if anyone still doubts that this isn't the most confusing JoJo gets, just try and follow along. But first, let's prepare, because this is going to be long and hard to follow. So when I first got the idea to break down this arc, I thought what would be the best way to accurately and comprehensively go through this arc, and I realized that the manga panels weren't going to cut it for visual aids. So I decided to recreate the entire location that this arc took place in via a 3D model. I installed Blender and started messing around with blocks and textures for a few hours until I realized that Blender is really complicated. So I got some help from one of our community members, Dicky, who I commissioned to help me out with this video and recreate the streets of Philadelphia way better than I ever could have. So shout out to Dicky, links to his social media are down below in the description. And to briefly talk about the 3D model itself, this is the most accurate recreation we came up with that best represents this arc's location. Although some liberties were taken, because in the manga, some parts of the city were drawn differently from chapter to chapter, most notably being the park's entrance. And also, the model has all the streets closed off that would otherwise be much longer, and this was due to only wanting to focus on the parts of the street relevant to the arc. But other than that, it's pretty damn accurate. So finally, let's get started. The arc begins at chapter 64, where the Steel Ball Run race is nearing its final stage, and all of our main characters, along with the Holy Corpse parts, are beginning to converge on the streets of Philadelphia. We first see Johnny and Gyro, who arrive from the east, who are currently tracking down Diego Brando, who is in possession of the left eye. Gyro proceeds to eat some horse shit off the ground and determines that Diego must be close by. They then spot Diego on horseback running down an alleyway on the other side of the park, while also spotting Wekapipo, who also seems to be tracking down Diego. Johnny and Gyro choose to ignore Wekapipo for now and continue chasing Diego by splitting up and sandwiching him from both sides. And before we go any further, it's important to take note of the characters we saw inside of the park when Diego was first spotted. We see a group of children, a pair of twins, and a painter, who will be extremely important later in the arc. And also during this arc, Araki provides a few timestamps which help a little bit at making this arc less confusing, but just a little bit. So right before Johnny and Gyro split up, the time is 3:39 p.m. Or at least that's what I thought at first, but after rereading this arc more than a handful of times and trying to piece everything together, the times just weren't adding up, making this arc even more of a headache than it already was. So I checked the original Japanese pages, and with the help of some of the community's translators, we found that the English scans had a small typo, and the time here was actually 3:59 p.m., which made everything make a lot more sense. So it turns out, for a lot of English readers, even if someone really tried to understand this arc's timeline by paying close attention and rereading, it still wouldn't make sense because of the typo, but thankfully since now it's been fixed. So to continue on, Johnny and Jiro split up. Jiro follows Diego and Johnny doubles back around to corner him, but Johnny keeps his eye on Jiro for just a moment and sees Disco approaching him from behind, and suddenly Valentine also appears and they both head towards Jiro. Valentine summons his D4C and Johnny yells out to warn Jiro, but suddenly Johnny is shot down from behind by an unknown silhouette, and we see that the children, the twins, and the painter inside the park all witness Johnny being shot. Johnny is then shot 3 more times and escapes through a sewer grate using Tusk Act 3. Jiro rushes over to see what happened, and he sees Wekapipo in an alleyway just by where Johnny was shot, but he's soon attacked by Disco, and they will continue to fight for the next few minutes. After Jiro defeats Disco, he goes back to the scene of the shooting to investigate, and he notices the people inside the park and asks them if they saw who shot Johnny. The children say it was Diego, but the twins say it was Wekapipo, and the painter says it was Valentine. Jiro is understandably confused by this and ponders how this could be possible. We then get some transition panels representing a change in time as we cut over to Diego approaching Wekapipo from behind, saying Johnny Joestar is better left alive, on the verge of death but not beyond. Wekapipo responds, "You stayed quiet, yes Dio, about the fact that Magenta was alive." I'm quoting this because it will be important to remember later. Also, I assume this conversation took place while Jiro was fighting Disco because of how Wekapipo is peeking his head around the corner like when Jiro saw him earlier. We then cut to a flashback of Jesus Christ hanging on the cross and coming back from the dead because, you know, this is JoJo. So after some history about the corpse parts, we then come back to Steel Ball Run present time, but 8 minutes before we last saw Jiro at 4:05 p.m. where Jiro and Johnny are discussing their plan to corner Diego. But this time we see the events that took place in those 8 minutes leading up to Johnny's shooting through Wekapipo's perspective. So Wekapipo also notices Diego run by as Johnny and Jiro do, and he decides that if he wants to defeat the president, then he should be with Diego because Diego has a corpse part and Valentine wants it. So I guess his plan is to attack Valentine while Valentine is attacking Diego. So Wekapipo follows Diego and on his way passes by Disco, who is currently heading towards Jiro. Wekapipo loses track of Diego and finds himself on an empty street with a gun on the ground. He's then attacked by a silhouette coming out of the American flag who appears to have the stand D4C. Wekapipo reaches for the gun and shoots the unknown man, who then falls to the ground and is revealed to be Johnny Joestar. Johnny escapes again through the sewers with Tusk, but this time we see that only the twins witness the shooting. Wekapipo is then approached by Diego similar to before, but this time Diego says everything is going as planned. Johnny Joestar is better left alive. And Wekapipo responds, "You, what were you doing just now? Magenta was alive. You should have known I was tracking you, Dio." So this conversation is happening at the same time and in the same place as we saw before, but this time with slightly different dialogue. And before we even have time to think, we go back in time again to 8 minutes ago at 4:05 p.m. where we see Diego and we continue the next 8 minutes through his perspective. Diego is searching for Lucy Steele, who is currently in possession of the other corpse parts, and Diego knows that Lucy has been disguising herself as the First Lady, so she should be near or inside of Independence Hall. So Diego jumps one of Valentine's guards, uses his outfit as a disguise, and enters the building. Once inside, Diego is passed by Valentine, and he thinks to himself that this might be a good opportunity to assassinate the president while he's alone, but he's distracted by Lucy when he sees that she's no longer in disguise and her identity has been revealed. So Diego holds off on the corpse parts and goes after Valentine in the streets of Philadelphia. Once outside, Diego passes by Disco and notices he's being followed by Wekapipo, so he decides to use Wekapipo and lure him towards Valentine in the hopes that Valentine and Wekapipo will fight each other so Diego can attack Valentine while he's distracted, which is exactly what Wekapipo is trying to do to Diego. So Diego turns a corner and uses his dinosaur power powers to jump on top of the building and waits for Wekapipo, but Wekapipo spots Diego on the roof and shoots at him. Diego attacks back as he falls onto the American flag. He grabs the gun and shoots Wekapipo. Wekapipo falls onto the ground and surprise, it's once again Johnny Joestar that Diego had shot. And from inside the park we see that only the children witness the shooting, and that Wekapipo is back in his previous location in the alleyway. Diego then jumps from under the American flag on the ground on top of the roof across the street, and he makes his way behind Wekapipo and starts the same conversation using the same dialogue from the first time we saw them talking. But this time we see the conversation continue, as Diego says, "Just now, did you see me shoot Johnny Joestar? I definitely just shot Johnny and he fell into the drain, but it wasn't me who did it." Diego claims it's Valentine's ability that's responsible for these events, but Wekapipo responds saying, "Dio, are you implying that you are the one who shot Johnny before? I couldn't understand what you were saying because I was the one who shot Johnny." And just moments later, Diego and Wekapipo are attacked by Valentine, and we see our first glimpse into D4C's ability, being able to access neighboring worlds and bring alternate versions of people to and from the different universes by putting himself or others in between two things, like an American flag and the ground, for example. And right at the climax of the fight, where two Diegos' paradoxical existence within the same universe begins to destroy each other, we go back in time again to 4:10 p.m., just 3 minutes before Johnny is shot, and we see Valentine and Disco cornering Gyro from the beginning of the arc. And as Johnny yells out to warn Gyro, Valentine uses D4C to essentially teleport over to Johnny by going behind a tree and coming out in between their horses. Valentine then shoots Johnny, and from within the park we see that only the painter witnesses the shooting. Valentine then escapes by going back in between the horses while leaving his gun on the street, and we see Wekapipo and Diego approaching, and suddenly cut to the two phasing inside of each other, both shooting Johnny at the same time. And from within the park we see that the children, the twins, and the painter all witness the shooting, and it's finally stated that D4C's ability is to allow neighboring worlds to exist simultaneously in the same location. Whatever that means. So in theory, after D4C's ability is revealed, it should be able to explain everything that just happened and give us an answer to who shot Johnny Joestar. So let me ask you, do any of you think that you would be able to fully explain everything that just happened from 3:59 to 4:13 and determine exactly when and how D4C's ability was being used to create the impossible situations we just saw? Maybe some of you, but don't worry, I'll save you the time and the headache because that's exactly what we'll be doing in today's video. So to start, the first thing we need to talk about are the differences in D4C's ability when it was first introduced compared to what it was established as later on. The first real explanation of D4C's ability is stated to allow neighboring worlds to exist simultaneously in the same location, and this concept is visualized in the next chapter with sponges representing different universes, and D4C's ability allows these two sponges, aka universes, to overlap with each other and become one. And applying this concept to Johnny's shooting to some extent explains how it was possible for 3 different people to all shoot Johnny at the same time, but unfortunately this ability contradicts what D4C would later become. So let me explain. Going by the sponge theory, that would mean that what we previously witnessed were the events happening in 3 different universes simultaneously. So we have 3 different sponges representing 3 different universes. Sponge 1 being the base universe where Valentine shoots Johnny and the painter is the witness. Sponge 2 being the universe where Wekapipo is attacked by Valentine, shoots him, and the twins are the witness. And Sponge 3 being the universe where Diego shoots at Wekapipo and the children are the witnesses. So originally, it would seem D4C's ability would be able to seamlessly merge all 3 of these universes, making them become one, with no duplicates, but rather replacing certain base universe characters with alternate universe characters. Like how when we first see Johnny get shot, all 3 groups within the park see the shooting at the same time. But in Universe 3, you can clearly see it's only the children that see, and the twins have their backs turned. So that would mean in this cluster of 3 universes combined that D4C created, it can pick and choose who to replace from each universe. As the base universe painter stays the same, Universe 2's twins replace the base universes, and Universe 3's children replace the base universes. But later on, we see that this just isn't how D4C works, and in Chapter 75, the stand gets its ability redefined defined with its rules established, saying the ability to travel limitlessly to other dimensions by getting caught in between two objects. If the same object or people from dimensions meet, they will both be annihilated, so caution is a must. You can't bring money with you, for some reason as a rule, and lastly, Valentine is the only exception to the annihilation rule, and the world where the corpse is acts as the base universe. So it may be possible that Araki had changed D4C's ability to something much simpler than what we saw during Johnny's shooting, and maybe even throughout the beginning of the D4C arc, Araki was still deciding exactly what he wanted D4C to be, and was experimenting with the general idea of accessing different dimensions. But I don't like retcons, so let's see if we can explain everything that happened in this arc with D4C's ability that would be established later on. So a few chapters after Johnny's shooting, when he's being healed by Gyro, Johnny gives us some insight on what actually happened, and we can trust Johnny because he has proved himself to be an absolute genius at deducing stand abilities more than a few times. So Johnny says, I was shot by Dio and Wikapipo, but it was because of the president's ability. Valentine's body went to a different world and brought another Dio and a different Wikapipo back from that world, and arranged it to make them shoot me. So by going off of how Johnny explains the situation, let's see if that's really what happened. So starting from the beginning, when Johnny and Gyro first arrive, up until the first time we see Johnny shot, there's nothing we can really see that would indicate D4C's ability being used, but we can establish that these first events take place in the base universe. So moving on to Wekapipo's perspective, Johnny claims Valentine brought another Wekapipo from another world to shoot him, and so far that adds up, as we can assume that when we see through Wekapipo's perspective, we are in an alternate universe, because the timeline is slightly off, being 4:05 p.m., and Wekapipo sees Johnny and Gyro still together, when before in the base universe the time was 3:59, right before they split up. So through Wekapipo's perspective, in what we can call Universe 2, he follows Diego but is attacked by Valentine in an alleyway, and during his fight, right before he shoots, we see that the American flag is falling on him, and in the next page he shoots Johnny Joestar and is no longer in the same alleyway but instead on the street that's in front of the park, which heavily implies that right before Wekapipo shot, he was brought into the base universe and shot our Johnny, which kinda makes sense and also aligns with what Johnny said. So now moving on to Diego's perspective, which again begins at 4:05 p.m., and we see Diego steal a disguise, go to Independence Hall, see Valentine, leave Independence Hall, and then begins being followed by Wekapipo, which confirms that Diego's perspective takes place in a third universe, because before in Universe 2, Wekapipo started following Diego almost immediately at 4:05 when he saw him near the park, and Diego did not go near Independence Hall, rather he led Wekapipo to the alleyway where he would then fight Valentine. And this third universe is further confirmed when we see Wekapipo shoot at Diego, which couldn't possibly be the same Wekapipo as before, because this is taking place at the same time when he was fighting Valentine. So Diego from the third universe attacks the third universe Wekapipo, takes his gun and falls onto the American flag. He then shoots at who he thinks is Wekapipo, but it's actually Johnny Joestar. So like Wekapipo, right before Diego shot, he was brought from his universe into the base universe by Valentine to shoot Johnny. And we can see Universe 2's Wekapipo in the base universe, still confused by when he first shot Johnny, which is further confirmed as when Diego approaches this Wekapipo, he makes no mention of them just fighting each other, because this Wekapipo was the one that fought Valentine. So right here you have Diego from Universe 3 talking to Wekapipo from Universe 2, who are both now in the base universe. So up until this point, things are kinda making sense and starting to add up, but unfortunately after this point, everything begins to fall apart, as it would seem Wekapipo from Universe 2 and Diego from Universe 3 have just replaced their base universe alternatives, and once they get into their fight with Valentine, it's then established that no two versions of the same person can exist in the same universe. But where were base universe Diego and Wekapipo when their alternate versions came into the base universe? Maybe it can be explained that they were swapped out simultaneously, so essentially replacing them, but because there was no mention or even suggesting of that happening, it doesn't seem likely. But now we get to the point where nothing makes any sense anymore, and it's really clear that D4C was breaking all of the rules that would later be established, because the corpse parts are existing in both Universe 2 and Universe 3, as we see when through Wekapipo's perspective, which should be Universe 2, he mentions the eye, and through Diego's perspective, which should be Universe 3, he sees Lucy, who appears to be pregnant because of the corpse parts inside her body. So with the rule that the corpse parts only exist in the base universe, that would mean what we saw from both Wekapipo and Diego's perspectives was taking place in the base universe, and at no point were they brought to another universe by D4C, which just cannot be possible because the timelines don't match up, and we see Wekapipo fight both Valentine and Diego in the same location, which could not be possible in the same dimension. And I haven't even mentioned the witnesses yet, which I guess could be explained that Valentine took the twins from Universe 2 and the children from Universe 3 and swapped them with the base universes, like the sponge example from earlier, but because of the corpse parts existing in all these perspectives, that would mean the witnesses were actually always from the base universe, even when the twins clearly had their backs turned to the shooting. So nothing makes any sense anymore, and the more I try to understand this arc, the more confusing it becomes. But I do have one last possible idea that could just maybe make sense of this arc, but I'd have to work under the assumption that D4C's ability falls more in line with its overlapping dimensions explanation. So maybe instead of seeing events happening in other universes, what we were seeing through Wekapipo and Diego's perspectives were possible realities that could happen within the base universe. Similar to the Schrodinger's cat experiment. For those that aren't familiar, Schrodinger's cat is a thought experiment where you imagine you put a cat in a sealed box with some sort of device that has a 50% chance of killing the cat. And until you look inside of the box to see the result, the cat is in a superposition as it's both dead and alive at the same time. And it's the act of looking to see the result that forces nature to make a decision. So what if originally D4C was some sort of twist on this Schrodinger experiment, but instead of 2 different outcomes, there are 3. Valentine shooting Johnny, Wekapipo shooting Johnny, or Diego shooting Johnny. And until the shooting is witnessed, all 3 possible outcomes are existing in the same place at the same time. Like the cat that could be dead and could be alive. But with the twist from D4C's ability, all possible outcomes are able to be witnessed by different people, thus making the different possibilities a reality. So if this was how D4C worked, this arc could be explained. But unfortunately, that's not how D4C works, so even after all of this, I still don't understand what was happening on the streets of Philadelphia from 359 to 413. And that's why, in my opinion, D4C and this arc are just the most confusing JoJo has ever gotten. And that's the video, guys, the most confusing stand in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, at least in my opinion, but honestly, I can't see how any other stand in this series could be more confusing than D4C when it's first introduced, because no matter how many times I tried to make sense of this arc, and trust me, I tried a lot of times, it always just ended in a mess because of the contradictions, the differences in the timeline, and Wekapipo being in 2 different places at the same time, but they're all in the base universe. It doesn't make sense, at least to me, but I at least hope my attempts made for an enjoyable video, and hope you guys understand this arc a little bit more by explaining how it doesn't make any sense, if that makes sense. But anyways, guys, like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more, and thank you all so much for watching. The Blender artist that helped out with the video with the 3D model that I thought was really cool, links to Dickie's stuff is down below in the description, and if you guys want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram or Twitch or join the Discord, all that's down below as well. So one last time, guys, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Peace.